I remember sitting in a president's meeting, and I was president at Midland, so it would have been probably in 2000 or something, and somebody said, you look around the table here, just in a few short years, I think maybe the number that's going out is 5 years, half of you sitting around this table are going to be retired. And of course, those were the folks who had been there in the very beginning. It dawned on us, this is going to change the system. The boy presidents who started this system, on whose backs these colleges were built, they were all going to be retiring. And we decided this could be bad news, or we could try to take the positive view here and say, well, there's an opportunity to bring in new leadership and new ideas. But either way we go on it, the system will be forever changed when the first wave of presidents have all retired.
Special schools had a wonderful heritage, but some viewed the special schools as not being the high quality program that it truly was.
I began to get feedback from the Department of Commerce that some of their industries were concerned about the term special schools.
People didn't really understand what that meant, and some folks said, well, special schools, that sounds like remedial education or something, and that was far from what it was.
And then one day when I went down to speak to my education committee, the Department of Education was going to follow me, and on the table on the side there were just tons of handouts that had on the front special schools. And I picked one of them up and took it with me, and what it was, they were getting up and arguing for money for the disabled students. The biggest wrestling match I had were with the program managers in changing that name. They were about ready to run me out of town. And I was brand new, right. Who are you coming over here? I mean, this is the golden, this is the goose that laid the golden egg, and you're messing with it. They were right there with the people who had used it. So people who've used it and know what it is, they think it is great. But the people who hadn't used it was the one we were going after.
So saw the need to change that name, went through an iteration or two, but I really think that the name that we use now, readySC, is great and should stand the test of time.
I don't know how much difference it really made. They didn't change the purpose, they didn't change the way it was done, they just changed the name.
readySC is still that program that would support a BMW, getting people, screening them, getting them ready, putting them on the assembly line, teaching them the skill, teaching the teachers. That's readySC.
I worked for 2 years with Spartanburg Technical College. Spartanburg's delegation met with a company. They were not familiar with technical education. They were familiar with community colleges. And they asked, why are you called technical education? It's like a technical education center. They said, you need to change it. It just gives the right tone. So we went about doing that. And buddy, we ran into a brick wall. I tell you what, when you've got the chairman of finance, the chairman of education, the Speaker of the House, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor saying no, 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 you're up against a brick wall. But finally, a member of the Spartanburg delegation went to one of the senators and said, if you want to get your budget passed over in the House, you better let us have the name change.
But I have great heartache over my friend Dan Terhune. He didn't want to be a tech school president. He came from Florida, and so he wanted to be only Spartanburg Community College, and he was offered a compromise, Spartanburg Technical, or Community Technical, or Technical Community, and his delegation rejected it. So they got the name Community College, and everybody else was left with the name Technical. And unfortunately, a lot of hard feelings in the legislature. So it's not a subject anybody wants brought back up. But it has proven that everything all of those folks said about it would do is wrong. It hadn't affected economic development in Spartanburg, hadn't affected their programs. In fact, they are growing and doing well. There's a sense when you're looking for the positive side that technical is something to be proud of. If I'd have thought about it when I came to the board that time, I would have asked for Midland's Community Technical College, because that's our history, our legacy, and I'm very proud that we do technical work.
Apprenticeship has been around for centuries in Europe, and that's really the way they do a significant part of their training educational program. And it just makes so much sense to marry those two things, the theory in the classroom with the actual hands-on paid experience. Is pretty powerful. Just about the time I came over to the system office, I was approached by a few of the business leaders who actually were managing European companies in the state, and said, you know, we really do need to get an apprenticeship going in South Carolina, and we believe the technical college system is the way to do this, to make this work. Will you guys take it on? And I was new, just going into the system office, new to the state board and so forth. I begged a little time and said, well, can we do a feasibility study just to see how would this work, and does it make sense for the technical colleges to be involved in it? So we put together a task force, and the conclusion was, absolutely, this does make sense for the state. And it did make sense for the technical colleges to lead it and drive it. Long story short, we decided to move ahead. At that time, there was a little apprenticeship activity in the state, but not very much. And if you compared what we were doing in South Carolina to even our neighboring states, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, it was really rather pitiful. North Carolina, with twice the population, had 6 times more apprentices than South Carolina. So we knew there was potential. And turns out we were right. We were fortunate. We brought in a good team to head the program up, and took the story to business leaders in the state, got the colleges very involved, showing them how they could provide the classroom instruction while the apprentices were working in local businesses. It took off like a rocket, and just phenomenal. The first year or two, the number of apprentices in the state had increased drastically. Interestingly, because there had been so little activity in the state, as we would try to talk to the folks in D.C. at the Department of Labor, they weren't very optimistic and hopeful about what we might be able to do with this. But as I was leaving, as I was retiring from the system office, they were contacting us and actually touting our system and what we were doing as one of the real models for the country. The system has had an evolving relationship with the universities. I think in the earlier days they felt a little threatened at times. When it really changed for me with the University of South Carolina, when I was at Midlands, Andrew Sorensen came in as president, and I remember meeting Dr. Sorensen at his one of the receptions just the first 3 days he was on campus, and he said, "I want to get together with you." And I said, "Well, great. I'll call your assistant and try to get on your calendar." He said, No. He said, I want to come over. I want to come meet with you in your office. And I have to tell you, I was blown away. That was not the relationship between the technical colleges and the universities up until that point. But we hit it off and just formed a good friendship. So I had a good relationship with him before I got to the system office. To be quite honest, he was one of the ones who encouraged me to go to the system. That was kind of a struggle. I wasn't sure if that was the right thing for me or not. But he called me and he said, you know, we've got a good working relationship. You go over there, and he said, I'd really like to talk about some things we can do statewide. So we had both learned about bridge programs, and when we saw some examples of bridge programs with one college and one university. But Andrew said, is there some way we could make this thing work statewide? And I said, I don't know, but we'll sure try. So we put some folks together representing the system. He designated a few folks at the university, and they got together and worked something out. And the idea is really kind of simple. We've been able to forge a pretty good articulation agreement that allows courses to be transferred from technical colleges to universities. But the missing piece was, yes, you can transfer these courses, but we wanted to make it a seamless transition for students. And basically what it said is that students in any technical college in an associate degree program could enter into this bridge relationship with the University of South Carolina. You would have the opportunity to visit the USC campus while you're still at the technical college. You can sit down and meet with our admissions counselors. You can sit down with our financial aid office and just really help smooth that transition.
I think this is a major step forward in the cooperation between all forms of higher education in South Carolina. Once the University of South Carolina or Clemson recognized that you can take their students and get them ready to go, that says a tremendous amount to the people of South Carolina. Why don't I just go ahead and take the 2 years at Midlands and go on to USC, which people have been doing for years. When Dr. Sorensen came to the University of South Carolina, I was going to do about a 10-minute orientation of our system, but I did 2 slides so he'd know we weren't tech schools, we were community colleges. So I put up a picture of Joliet Junior College, and he said, "Jim, that's where I finished my first 2 years of college." His mother was the secretary to the board of that school. He graduated high school at 15, and she said, "You're not going off to Yale at 15, so you're coming over here to Joliet Junior College." So he was a fan of the community college, and he said that night, "You know, before I leave the university, I want us to have a PhD program in community college leadership." Well, we don't have that, but we have something almost as good. So we developed this program we have now called the Graduate Certificate Program in Community College Leadership.
I would give Dr. Hudgens, Jim Hudgens, credit for really seeing the need for that and getting the leadership program going to help identify people who were in the system, coming up through the system, who might have the potential and might have the interest in someday getting into senior leadership positions in their colleges and hopefully some presidents. But the other thing that we saw, and this was about the time I guess I was making the transition over to the system office, is we are going to be getting folks in from out of state as well. And while we share a lot of similarities with many other systems, there is a uniqueness, and also there's a history, there are traditions in the system that we didn't want to lose. We wanted folks to come in from other states, other systems with fresh ideas and help us become better. But we didn't want them to come in and try to turn it upside down just because they didn't understand what we were. So we put together an orientation program that we required all new presidents to participate in, making sure that new presidents coming in understood the governance structure in the state, a bit about the history of the system, about programs run through the state board, like the Apprenticeship Carolina program, like readySC, a part of the system from the very, very beginning, extremely important to the state, to make sure that new presidents had a good understanding of all those things. We have been fortunate to attract good people in, and that's a good thing. I mean, it is nice to have folks who come in and say, you know, that's we did it a little differently back in Ohio or back in Florida or whatever. As long as they understand their reasons why we do things the way we do too. So we wanted to use the best ideas they could bring in, but at the same time preserve the tradition, the culture that has made our South Carolina system a bit unique.
You have to empower people all the time, but you, as an imperative, must empower people during the hard times.
The state faced a very, very severe economic downturn, and state revenue just took a nosedive. We didn't get an exemption from having to deal with the cuts.
This office here made a tremendous effort and sacrifice to get through that. But you have to do what you have to do in those times. Dr. Russell provided great leadership. We found ways to figure things out.
But it was devastating on so many levels. I guess I look at the world through the lens of technical and community colleges, and it seems to me that leaders in state government should see it the same way, and many do, but it would seem that it would be the last thing that you would want to cut. You would want to try to save that as best you could. That really is the hope for turning an economy around and maintaining a strong economy. But I guess everyone had to share in the pain, and the colleges were able to offset some of it through an increase in tuition, which just bothered me greatly. I hated to see that happen. One of the things that has made this system so effective and has made it great from its inception is we've always prided ourselves on being accessible. That's one of the, for me anyway, one of the cornerstones of what makes a technical college, community college work, is being accessible to everyone without any regard for their ability to pay. But at the same time, the alternative would have been to shut down programs, which is not a good alternative at all. But the colleges were able to offset a good bit of the state cut. Not so much the state board, the system office. We were funded 100% through state dollars. So every 1% cut to us came right out of our budget. And over that period of, I guess, about 18 months, we ended up having to reduce our workforce there in the system office by about a third. And so there were a lot of people who were caught up in it and through absolutely no fault of their own lost jobs. So it was hard on so many levels.
We got into cost control. We got into questioning things that we hadn't questioned before at the system level as well as at the school level. even to the program level.
We developed a very careful, methodical process, trying to protect those services that were most essential, and I think we did a pretty good job.
We're never going to see the level of funds from the General Assembly that we've seen for the last 15 years, and it's diminishing and may diminish more. But we are in a situation where we have to be entrepreneurial, and in doing so, we're able to, in my view, find ways to keep that affordability even with less funding.
One of the nice things for us is when the economy turns down, students go up. They start looking for places to go. They start retooling and turning themselves around, which means we've got a job to do. The colleges seem to say, okay, yep, it's tough times out there, but you know what? We're going to get a bonus out of this. We're going to get a slug full of students, and we're going to be able to do some things we couldn't do before because we have those students.
It's hard to say enough good things about what Boeing has meant for South Carolina. We, of course, had some aircraft companies who were going to be suppliers to Boeing, but they were going to be making pieces in South Carolina and then shipping all those to Everett, Washington to be assembled into the Dreamliner, the 787. For us to get Boeing to build this assembly plant for that 787 in South Carolina is phenomenal. I mean, think about it. This is the first time a commercial composite passenger airplane has ever been built in the history of the world. And this is going to be built in two places in the world, one in Everett, Washington, and one in Charleston, South Carolina. So not that we weren't on the map, but certainly we are absolutely higher up on the global map than we've ever been because of that. The only other thing that I can think of that would compare to that in South Carolina would be BMW. If you think about BMW X3s and X5s and then a Boeing 787 composite passenger aircraft, it doesn't get any more sophisticated or as recognizable as top of the line manufacturing. And we're doing that in this state. And so it was very exciting to be involved in that, to learn a little bit about how those planes are made, then to think about how to put together a training program to meet the needs of Boeing and their employees. We were under a good bit of pressure with this because Boeing was getting a lot of pressure back home in Washington to add this assembly line to Everett and build all those planes. And quite frankly, I don't think it ever occurred to the folks in Washington that the plane could be built anywhere other than there. And so it came as a bit of a shock. Boeing stood up to a lot of criticism and a lot of pressure from the state of Washington and from the employees there when this decision was announced. So we felt the pressure to step up and make sure this thing has got to work, and it's got to work very, very well. There was a lot of tough negotiation. Boeing understood just how critical the processes are in putting that plane together. And I was very happy to hear how seriously they take those things, as someone who flies on a plane every once in a while. But this is critical stuff. And they asked us some hard questions, and they wanted to make sure that we understood. There's so many inspections and so forth that has to be done exactly right, and we can't afford a lot of do-overs. I mean, can we get this workforce in South Carolina? You don't have a history. That's what they were hearing back home. The people who work in the Boeing plants in Washington are typically third generation. And as they said, this is in our DNA. This is in our blood. We know how to build airplanes. Those folks in South Carolina have never done this. They can't learn how to do this. And so we had to be rather bold in stepping up and saying, it may be that we don't have the history, but we certainly have the history and the experience and the track record in helping folks learn to do it. And we're very confident that we can. We had to be convincing, obviously we were, but I didn't have any problem stepping up and saying those things because I know what we can do. And there's just not another program like our readySC program in the country. Many have copied us, but I mean, we're the best. And I knew we could do it. I knew we could do it. From everything I hear, we have absolutely held up our end of the bargain, and it's working really, really well. Hard to put a value on what that means to South Carolina.